Hi, Pete. I would like to welcome you to the podcast today. I'm sure anybody who follows me is probably thinking, it's really about time. It's really about time Pete Klein has been on your podcast. And that is because you are probably an excellent example of what I talk about on the podcast, which is having a well balance between, what you do typically during the day that may or may not be creative, but you have definitely a lot of creative outlets. So, first, welcome. And let's talk about what it is that you do.
So I am executive director, and thank you, by the way, before we get into this, thank you for having me on your podcast today. It's been a long time coming. I
Yes,
appreciate
we've talked about it
I
for a long time.
for a long time. I think my mom had to pay you two goats and a sheep finally to get me onto the podcast, but I appreciate you getting me on here nonetheless. So yes, let's dive into it right now, shall we? So I'm a currently executive director and founder of VETMotorsports. And VETMotorsports is a non-clinical therapy program that places active guard, reserve, military members, plus any veteran with a service-connected injury or Gold Star parent into motorsports as a non-clinical therapy program. And so for the layman, basically what we do is we take that certain or specific population and place them into any activity that involves gasoline and tires and crowds. So we do land speed racing, or we do drag racing, or we get them as mechanics in the teams, or we get them behind the wheel and any numerous events across the country. And we've been doing this since 2013. And I have a great board of directors and also great volunteers that have help manage the program across the nation. So we've done some amazing things and worked with some amazing partners like Triumph North America, Mazda Motorsports. The Sports Car Club of America is currently one of our supporters in getting people engaged in grassroots activities. And really, that's it. So we call it helmet therapy. I know this is longer than a 30-second pitch, but we call it helmet therapy. And what we're really trying to do is provide a outreach or second or third home to those that are looking to be productive and not commit suicide and commensurate with other veterans or civilians and like-minded people. And that's really what we do. And it's been an extremely successful program since 2013.
Yeah, and just to kind of explain just a little bit more to our audience, or my audience, I guess is your audience now too, is that what at least what my big takeaways was is that a lot of these people who have served this country do deal with PTSD, and you did speak directly about that. But I thought it was really interesting on how, when the feeling is very similar, well, or maybe it is, maybe you can explain this. It's similar to an adrenaline rush, and that's the same thing that they're getting out of these race car, motorcycle environments. And they're able to decide or determine that, okay, this is a good rush versus this is a PTSD attack, if you will.
Right. And I think that's exactly it. So I think you have to look at what um, somebody in the military may go through if they're put into a very stressful or combat situation. It's high activity, high stress, high adrenaline. Um, your life may be in danger depending on the environment that you're in, but you're working with others to control the situation, to get through that situation. And really, motorsports is really kind of replicating that, except hopefully at the other end of that, you're not getting killed or no one's shooting at you at the other end, right? So you're
Exactly.
really trying to replicate that camaraderie, that sense of that adrenaline rush. As a former competitor, in motorsports, I'd come back from a weekend of racing motorcycles, and for 3 days, I would be completely depleted because emotionally, I was wiped out. My adrenaline had been going for 2 or 3 days. I've been all revved up, and now I come back and now I'm depleted and maybe sometimes get depressed because you're not in that environment. It's very addictive, and so really that kind of to a certain degree or maybe not depending on who's listening replicates the environment that they may have been in while they were in service, right? So trying to control that adrenaline, trying to control that environment, understanding that it's okay to feel that way at the end of a weekend or at the end of an event, right? Understanding that there are other forms, other places that you can get that kind of same feeling without putting yourself out at risk, and being around other people that really understand that environment.
And you touched upon it a little bit on how you got started in this because you did race competitively. I swear you still race competitively on a lot of different things, but in that particular case, when you first started this out, um, that's kind of how you got the idea for this.
Yeah, I mean, let's be fair. I mean, I'm being interviewed by my wife, right? So we have to. So you kind of lived it, right? So
Or pretending
you
like I
know,
know nothing.
oh, we're gonna pretend you like know nothing, right? Uh, so for our viewers out there, I had been racing motorcycles for since like 2004, and I wanted to go professional or semi-pro, and I had watched a show called Top Gear, which some people may or may not have seen, and they did a little segment on veterans being integrated into motorsports, and I thought that was a really good thing to do. And I thought, based on all my experiences, right, racing motorcycles, being in that culture, being provided opportunities to work at the world level, not as a racer, but on crews and teams, why couldn't I just do the same and kind of replicate that? And so we did, right? We got some sponsorship money. We had some people to support us who were very generous with their time and money, and we did it, and it was super successful for my first outing as a pro am. And then we went and did it the next weekend. It was super successful until I headed up in the hospital. And I think, we're not going to go down that road when you were packing up the car to go to Indianapolis Motor Speedway with our daughter, and all of a sudden I'm in the hospital, right? But we were on to a formula that, actually worked. And so from that point, it really became, and hopefully this is to the question, it really became a question or a point for me of what was my legacy going to be? I currently was injured. I couldn't race a motorcycle. So we kept on doing the veterans outreach. And then we got a little bit more money the next year to do a team. But it was really an open-ended check. We could do whatever we wanted. We could go and race again, or we could go and set up a nonprofit, and decided to do a nonprofit. And it became less about, I guess, my needs at the time, although it was really not, it was very difficult for me to kind of absorb the fact that I was no longer going to be racing at whatever level that I was racing at, and that I was basically going to be managing a nonprofit. But you were at that point accepted, hey, you want to be known for not the guy that had a really cool idea that kind of like fell apart because he ran out of money, but the guy that put some stuff together that made a sustainable program that helped others and reached more people than just the 5 or 10 people he had reached the previous year. So that was really kind of the drive at that point. You know, and I think the thing that someone told me who may or may not be on this interview with me said, hey, you know what? You've got a great idea. Just don't screw it up, because you were really working with people that, I don't want to use the word fragile, but they're in a space where they need support. Right. And I think that was really the most important thing that was ever said to me. And I also want to say, for anybody out there thinking about a side hustle, or stepping into the abyss of a new project, I think that's the thing. I think when you may have this great idea, but you don't know if it's going to work. I think the only way you're going to figure it out is if you just go and you do it. I mean, you get some people around you that really support you, but they're smarter than you, right? Don't surround yourself with a bunch of good friends that say, oh, you're great and you're going to do a great job, and the whole thing implodes. Get people around you that are critical thinkers that support you, but in a critical way. And I think that was, I remember just, sitting in the car, driving to my 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever, and saying to myself, I was looking down the precipice of this risk of doing this thing, right? And it really ended up being a great thing. But I think people need to hear that it is scary. It is going into the unknown, and that success or failure, whatever happens out of that, I mean, everybody's going to face that at some point or time, you know, when launching a project or stepping into something that's completely different. And it could be business oriented, or it could be personal relationship oriented. It could be any number of things, right? So I felt like that needs to be said. And I'm not sure, that gets touched upon with anybody else in these interviews, right? But there's a huge risk of putting yourself out there artistically or creatively or business wise with that stuff, right? So I wanted to say
Well,
that.
things like that, when you're a maker of things, which is what you are, you get it's very personal, and you don't want to be necessarily delivering something that's going to be horrible or judged poorly or things like that. So it
Right.
is a very, very personal thing that you're creating. And I loved a couple of things that you said in that, this is really something that was based on a passion you had, and then you plugged in people that could help you essentially make this work, and because they had their specialties. And I think like starting any business or nonprofit or things like that, you have that idea, but then at some point you're like, okay, this is a little out of, little, I'm in the deep end here. I got to get some help. And you have had great people step up, and not only has this become a national program, but you have received a number of acknowledgments for the work that you've done too. So, kudos to you, Peter Klein, that you have been recognized by many organizations on the hard work that you have done and what you have created.
Well, I think I appreciate that. Thank you. And I try to be humble with this, and you should be. I think you can't get there without the whole body experience, right? Without the people that are behind you, right? I would certainly be remiss if I didn't, thank all the people that I ran the idea by or were previous and current board of directors and volunteers and peer leaders and all that. I mean, it's just not me that gets the award. I mean, it's a testament to the idea, but the people that are behind the idea, and that it's just more than just me. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's just, it's like anybody that wins an award in business, right? It's not just them; it's the people that made the business happen, right? That made it successful, right? You just happen to you happen to catch a flame of something that had a lot of gravitas to it, right? That people could connect with.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of just taking a little bit of the credit, though, Pete. As you know, I have
Right.
had opportunities as well, and I definitely a team, you know, built awards sort of thing. But at some point, you do have to take just a little bit of credit too. So I'm gonna let you take a little bit of credit right
I'll
now.
t- Listen. I'm not denying that. Listen, I'm not denying that I haven't worked hard at it. Right. I have put a lot of time into it, but I also recognize that I needed other people to help me with that because there was no way that I was going to get it done. Right. Just on my own. Right.
Exactly, exactly. And
Right.
I love the fact that you
Period.
kind of carved something out, like you said, out of your 8 to 5, that was a little more of an outlet, that was something that drove your passion a little bit more.
Well,
And
well, can I get into that for a second?
sure,
Right. So I'm going to point at the camera. I'm going to get into that. So I think for those that listen, I think it's hugely important to understand, if you have an 8 to 5 or a 9 to 5 or whatever, right? That ultimately, what is that for you at the other end of that? I mean, if you come to the realization that your 8 to 5, your 9 to 5, for as much of a great job as it may or may not be, it's merely a stepping stone for whatever you want to do. And I think that's hugely important. I think sometimes you need to come to the realization that whatever you have in front of you, and I'm not being critical here, right? I'm just being realistic, right? That what is in front of you is going to be no more or no less than what it really is, right? And that your engagement into that is going to be, you can engage in all you want, but there's going to be a ceiling for that engagement, right? And if you're trying to be more than what that is, then you need to figure out how you're going to get that satisfaction, whether it's your own thing or working with other people in a different environment. This has nothing to be, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying I'm not grateful for the opportunities that an 8 to 5 gives you, but what I am saying is that if your 8 to 5 is really just your 8 to 5 and you're not getting anything out of it more than, and you have other ideas in it, then you need to find, then maybe the other outlet or the side hustle is where you need to go to get that satisfaction if that part of your career is not giving it for you. And that was the thing that was driving me. I was not getting any, I was enjoying it, but I was not getting a satisfaction out of it. I recognized what it was providing, but I also recognized it was never going to be more than what it was, right? And I think
And
you have to come to
that
that
is why you're the
realization.
perfect guest for these podcasts, Pete, because that's exactly what we talk about. About
Right,
how
right,
you can't stay in that left brain space all the time, because there is a lot of medical evidence that says that that can lead to depression and a lot of sadness. So you have to use that right side, that creative side, on the making side. And some people don't realize that they think when I say that they're like, "Oh, I'm not an artist." It has nothing to do with being an artist.
right,
It's about doing other things that are not left brain driven. Now, before we get too much further down the road, I do have to ask you the question:
right.
when you were a child and when you woke up, let's say in the summer, and your feet hit the ground, what were some of the things that you really, really loved doing?
Well, if my daughter is any indication, it's napping. But as a teenager, I mean, I think I loved going to the library. And I think that was something that was instilled to me by my grandparents when we spent time with them in the summer, because we would have to go to the library and pick out a book and read a book and then talk about that book. I think that had a huge impression on me because I loved going to the library and reading books and getting kind of lost in that environment. Um, it wasn't, I mean, I wasn't a big school. I liked school, but I wasn't a big school person per se. I mean, I was an athlete, but I wasn't like the best athlete. I just happened to be on some really good teams in the high school and junior high. But I loved reading, and I think reading, and to a certain extent, also I loved writing. I loved writing short stories and poetries. I think literature really for me was something that I could really kind of get into because I could send me to another world, right, in a book or a different place, or I could express my creativity in writing, right? And I think that's it.
And your creativity didn't stop there because somewhere along the way, too, you got involved with being a band member. So let's talk a little bit about that as far as your youth and what you did there.
So again, disclaimer, right? Disclaimer, right? So and I'm going to be if for people that know me or that know us or whatever, like, I'm pretty transparent with like because I'm a Scorpio, right? So I'm going to be transparent with my feelings and all that. I was never a really good musician in high school, right? Period. I mean, full stop. And I didn't really start playing music until college, right? And then I ended up meeting some people in college and we ended up getting a band together and I was in and out of that for a while and then ended up back in it. And then we had, a couple of cassettes for those that knows what those were, right? We did a cassette and a 45 and we ended up getting a recording contract right out of all that, and the reality is one of 10 bands get successful after they get signed. They'll sign like 10 bands and one out of the 10 will rise to the top and the other nine will fall to the bottom and they get dropped and we got dropped. But we had more success with that than most other people do. And I don't take that for granted, right? I think being on a record label is a lot of work. I think trying to get yourself to the record label level is a lot of work. We were inspired by a lot of great bands that were here in at least for me in Columbus, Ohio, locally. I loved rock and roll, and I've always loved rock and roll. I grew up in Cleveland. I mean, I loved, listening to WMMS as a kid, right, at night. And I also grew up in Columbus. I lived listening to QFM 96. And I think you know that because I'll go around the house and music's playing all the time, and it's always a different genre of music going on. Um, I mean, rock and roll is an amazing vehicle. Music is an amazing vehicle for people, right? It transports them to other places, and it's a very emotional medium. I mean, I loved recording music. I loved playing rock music, and I loved being in bands. And I've been in some really fun projects, man, that were just so cool to be around. Whether it was Marcy Mays from Scrawl, um, doing a whole bunch of AC/DC covers in Chicago, or going and recording and going and playing South by Southwest, and you know, it's some really really great experiences, right? And I think here's the thing too, and I mentioned this in a job interview and they looked at me like I was nuts. I think what being in a band with 4 to 5 people, in a van, traveling the country, or being in what that teaches you is how to manage other people, right? How to manage people in environments, understand their temperament, right? It's like a huge HR problem when you're in a band. You're trying to make sure that everybody is getting along, right? And the other thing that being in a band teaches you is logistics, right? You try to figure out how to get here to there to here to there on the minimal, on the least amount of money, how much gas, how much food, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff on the backside of that. And I went to an interview and told them about that, and they just didn't get it, right? But it's true. I mean, being in a band is like being married to 4 to 5, however many people are in it, like 4 to 5 people, right?
Right.
And it's a huge, it's a PR thing. You do public relations for them. I mean, it's a great experience, right? And I'm sure there's other people listening in on this podcast that can relate to other things that they've been involved in, whether it's being an artist or a painter or a musician or whatever, in your own PR firm trying to manage your own talent. It's crazy. I mean, but it's a great thing. I love it. I loved it. I still love it.
Yeah, and you still get to apply some of those skills today in your regular job, and working with a nonprofit too. I mean, we get our education wherever we can in some cases, and most of the time it's from life, and it's not necessarily from school or what have you.
Got it from the streets, man. We got it from the streets.
That's exactly it. Okay, and then my last question for you is, since you are not in the band anymore and you do not race motorcycles, what do you do to unplug when you come home from that job, that job?
That's a good
You're the
question.
nonprofit, obviously, still that you are doing, but
You
there's
know,
other things creatively that you do that you could share with everyone.
so I still consider myself an athlete, to a degree. So I race bikes and I exercise vigorously, as they say. I like to think of myself as mildly competitive in that capacity. Uh, that to me is relaxing. I love to cook. I love to cook for my wife. She may be listening in on this. I'm not quite sure. I love to cook for her. I think that's extremely relaxing for me. It used to be cleaning, but I'm over that. I don't want to clean the house anymore. Who does? Who wants to clean a house? But cooking
Or
is great. And
exchange.
our interchange, right? And then, one of the things that I don't do enough, and I think you know this because you may have talked to my wife, is that I mean, I find this ability to write poems for her extremely cathartic, right? Cathartic in the sense that uh, I'm able to express myself like as her husband, and because it's a really overwhelming kind of vibe. And this is not the podcast. I think there's another podcast that talks about love, and I don't think that's the one here. But I think for me, I think
Watch the drift.
right. I don't want to drift out of that, but I think being able to write is cathartic for me. I think being able to exercise is cathartic for me because I'm able to stay physically in shape. And I think cooking is a way for me to express love as well, or express myself. I mean, to the listener or viewer, they may sound like blasé, but for that stuff, it's pretty important to me, right? And yeah, I really dig that stuff.
Cool.
And also obviously run the nonprofit. I mean but
We already
that,
talked about that. This is all
yeah,
about you at this point. So
it's
when
me.
you're
It's
not
me.
doing all of that, you are cooking and working out and
Yeah,
just challenging yourself, if you will, in
right.
bicycle racing right now.
Right, right. And I try not to break things around the house, right? So that's
That too is another podcast.
right.
But I want to thank you for being here and for accepting my invitation finally after me begging you for months to be on my podcast. Actually, no, that's not true.
No, that is true. It is true.
We talked about it a lot, but it was just a matter of us just kind of getting it done. And this worked out just perfectly. We had the time. And I appreciate you taking the time to focus on me and my conversation, even though it was interrupted with a phone call. And and I really appreciate you. And thanks for being on today.
Well, I appreciate being there. I encourage. Can I say something in closing here? Is this allowed?
You may.
I encourage anybody viewing or listening to this podcast or both to pursue their passion. I think we have seen it time and time again. People just, I'm not ready, or I don't know, or whatever. I think you need to be able to let it go and pursue the things that you think are important. And don't let your fears overcome you. And I think it's hugely important to say. So if you're listening to this and on the fence about doing something legal, that is, then I would recommend that you go and do it because you've got nothing to lose.
And I think that's a perfect way to end the conversation. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate it.